Imagine you're a new parent. Maybe your baby has pretty severe eczema, or, there's a history of other food allergies in the family. You're probably constantly worried about peanuts, right? Scanning every single label because you know just how serious a peanut allergy can be. It's definitely not just a passing concern. It's become a really significant challenge affecting, well, a growing number of kids globally, and it can lead to life-threatening reactions. Okay, let's unpack this. Peanut allergy. It's not just this common worry for families, it's also a really rapidly evolving area of medical research. Today, we're diving into some fascinating new understandings, especially around diagnosis and prevention in infants, and what it all means for families like yours. Our mission for this deep dive is basically to cut through all the information overload from recent research and expert insights. We'll focus on these sort of groundbreaking diagnostic approaches, understanding who's most at risk, how we might prevent it, and even how to think about what treatment success really means. The goal is to give you the key nuggets so you feel truly well-informed.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how our understanding of peanut allergy, from identifying risk right through to effective management, is really being refined by these rigorous studies. It's offering both clarity, which is great, but also raising new questions for families and clinicians alike. We've certainly come a long way, but the data, it's always revealing these new nuances,
Definitely. So let's start with just the sheer scale of the problem. Peanut allergy is, well, it's a significant and increasing concern. We've seen its prevalence basically double in recent decades. It's affecting about, 1.8% of children in the UK, maybe 1.4% in North America, and a really striking 3.0% in Australia.
And this isn't just, a mild inconvenience for most. It typically develops in early childhood, and it remains a really common cause of life-threatening anaphylaxis. The potential severity of those reactions is what makes it such a critical area of research and, of course, parental concern.
Right. And what's particularly challenging, I think, especially for parents dealing with this, are the traditional diagnostic methods for infants. Tests like the whole peanut extract skin prick test, let's call it SPT, or the specific IgE blood test, the IgE, the whole peanut extract. They often have pretty low diagnostic specificity. Imagine the stress, right? For parents when a test comes back positive, but it might not even be accurate. You might be told your baby has a peanut allergy, which then leads to this whole cascade of further tests and worry, only maybe to find out later it was a false alarm. That emotional roller coaster. Wow, for any new parent, that's enough to want a better solution.
That's precisely it. And that's where some of this new research is providing what looks like a real game changer. There's a particular test for infants, specifically those aged about 4 to 11 months, called the ERA-H2 specific IgE.
Okay, ERA-H2 specific IgE. This new test sounds incredibly promising, especially, like you said, for worried parents. So what exactly did the research show about its effectiveness? How does it actually pinpoint the allergy better?
Well, there was a key study focusing on infants who hadn't had peanuts before, but did have risk factors, things like moderate to severe eczema, a history of other food allergies, or a close family member with peanut allergy. The main finding: this ERA-H2 specific IgE test is significantly superior for diagnosing actual peanut allergy in these babies. Think of it this way. Sensitivity-wise, if a baby truly has a peanut allergy, this test will catch it about 94% of the time. Pretty good. But here's the real game changer for parents. Its specificity. It's incredibly specific, giving a false alarm only about 2% of the time.
2%. Wow.
Yeah, which means far, far less unnecessary worry and, importantly, fewer invasive follow-up tests like food challenges.
Okay, so how does that stack up against the older methods? Because 94% sensitivity and 98% specificity, that sounds, really, really good.
It is, yeah. Compare that to the traditional whole peanut SIGI blood test. While it caught 100% of true allergies in that study, so high sensitivity, it also gave a false alarm about 22% of the time. 22%.
That's a huge difference in false positives.
Huge. And the traditional skin prick test, the SPT, it wasn't much better, maybe around a 12% false positive rate in that study. And interestingly, other specific peanut components they looked at, like ERA-H1, ERA-H3, or ERA-H8, they didn't really add significant diagnostic value for these young infants. In fact, ERA-H8 was basically useless as a diagnostic tool in this context.
That really does sound like a profound shift. So what are the big implications then of relying maybe just on ERA-H2 psi for screening, for families and maybe for the healthcare system too?
The implication is potentially massive. If you're screening these high-risk infants before they're even introduced to peanut for the first time, the research suggests measuring only ERA H2CC should really be considered. This could substantially cut down on those false positives, reduce the need for extensive allergy specialist care, and fewer of those stressful, resource-intensive oral food challenges. It might even simplify the process enough that, screening could potentially be done by general practitioners or pediatricians, not just allergy specialists.
This finding really prompts us to ask, though, why does this one single component, ERA H2, perform so much better? It seems to point towards a much more precise understanding of the immune response, doesn't it? Moving beyond these kind of generalized tests to pinpoint the specific proteins that truly signal a clinical allergy.
Exactly. It's about identifying the key culprit more accurately.
So moving on from diagnosis then, let's talk about identifying those high-risk infants in the first place. We know early sensitization, the IgE kind, typically begins in infancy. There was that landmark study, the Learning Early About Peanut Allergy study, LEAP. Its goal was actually prevention, right? By introducing peanut early to high-risk infants, specifically between 4 and 10 months old. And they defined high risk pretty clearly. Infants with severe eczema or egg allergy or both. But importantly, they excluded babies who already had a big skin prick test reaction over 4 millimeters because they figured those kids likely already had peanut allergy.
Correct. And that LEAP study gave us some really critical predictors of sensitization. Severe eczema and egg allergy, they were consistently identified as strong predictors of peanut sensitization, looking at both skin tests and the Sagi blood levels. So it validated using those as risk criteria. The duration of eczema also seemed to play a role in predicting sensitization.
Okay, but I understand it also revealed some really surprising things about how sensitization can start even before you see a clear skin test reaction.
Yeah.
That's where it gets really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. That was a key finding. In the ALE screening phase, they looked at those high-risk infants, severe eczema or egg allergy, but who had zero reaction, a 0 millimeter wheal, to the peanut skin prick test. And get this. A surprising 17% of those infants still showed significant peanut Sigi sensitization in their blood work. 17%. And overall, more than half, about 58% of that specific high-risk skin test negative group had some detectable peanut Sigi in their blood. Yeah. So it clearly shows that sensitization, the immune system reacting, can happen even without a visible skin test reaction at that point, and that the whole process starts really early in infancy. That was a significant discovery.
The LEEP study also uncovered something pretty fascinating related to different populations, didn't it? What was that about?
Yes, it did. They found that individuals identified as Black were, strikingly associated with a significantly higher risk of showing peanut-specific IgE sensitization in their blood. The odds ratio was quite high, over 5 times more likely to show these markers compared to other groups in the study. And these participants also tended to have higher overall IgE levels and higher specific IgE levels to both peanut and egg white.
Okay, so higher IgE in blood tests. That seems like it would mean higher allergy risk, which sounds straightforward enough. Is that the whole story, though?
Not quite. And this is where it gets paradoxical. It's an example of what statisticians sometimes call the Simpson paradox, where you see a trend in different groups, but when you combine them, the trend disappears or even reverses. What they found was, after statistically accounting for the peanut CG levels, being Black was actually associated with decreased skin prick test reactivity.
Decreased. So higher IgE in the blood, but potentially a smaller reaction on the skin test.
Exactly. For a given level of IgE sensitization detected in the blood, their skin test reaction might be significantly smaller.
Huh. That's really counterintuitive. What does this complexity tell us about how we should interpret diagnostic results then?
Well, it really highlights that these immune markers can manifest differently across different populations, in this case, racial groups. This data suggests that while the underlying immune markers, the SIGINGO-E, might be elevated, the way the allergy expresses itself clinically, like through a skin test, can differ significantly. It certainly influences how we need to interpret diagnostic results and just underscores the complexity of the immune system and how it shows up in different individuals. It's not always straightforward.
Okay, so back to LA's main finding. It provided really compelling evidence, didn't it, that introducing peanut into the diets of those high-risk infants between 4 and 11 months old dramatically decreases the risk of them developing clinical peanut allergy by age 5, and that protective effect even persisted when they checked again at age 6. That was truly groundbreaking in allergy prevention.
Absolutely groundbreaking. And based heavily on this, the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAI, released updated prevention guidelines back in 2017. Essentially, they recommend that high-risk infants, again, severe eczema, egg allergy, or both, should ideally undergo screening first. That could be CAE or SPT. Then, potentially an oral food challenge if needed, with the goal of introducing peanut into the diet somewhere between 4 and 6 months of age, and for lower-risk infants. They suggest introducing peanut-containing foods without prior testing, maybe around 6 months for those with mild to moderate eczema, or just age-appropriately along with other solids for low-risk kids.
Right. So the NIAI guidelines, they represent this huge leap forward,
Yeah.
obviously. But implementing such widespread recommendations, it rarely goes without hitting some complexities or challenges, does it?
Yeah.
What were some of the key debates or practical hurdles that popped up when these guidelines were rolled out?
Oh, absolutely. Lots of discussion. For instance, that precise age window for high-risk infants, the 4 to 6 months, that's debated. Because while the guidelines recommend that tighter window, the actual mean age of introduction in the LEAP study itself was closer to 8 months, and only about 18% of the kids in LEAP were introduced before 6 months. So there's a bit of a disconnect there.
Interesting point.
Also, the recommendations for the medium and low-risk groups, they're based more on expert opinion and sort of a likely to do no harm principle, rather than the same level of high-quality randomized controlled trial evidence that underpin the high-risk recommendation.
Okay, so it sounds like translating this really amazing research into something practical for every single family is, well, it's a huge undertaking. Beyond just the age window, what were some of the other significant sticking points or areas where the guidelines maybe still feel like a work in progress?
Another major concern that came up is something called screening creep, and also just the resource burden on the healthcare system. The worry is that the guidelines' complexity could inadvertently lead to, unnecessary screening of lower risk infants, maybe due to parental anxiety, which is understandable, or perhaps overdiagnosis of mild eczema.
Right, I can see that happening.
And that can then increase specialist referrals, bump up the need for oral food challenges, and potentially even delay peanut introduction because the whole process becomes complex or families face barriers like access to specialists or insurance issues.
And what about sort of unintended consequences of doing broader testing if that happens?
Yeah, that's a big one too. The guidelines explicitly discourage testing for other foods when you're evaluating for peanut allergy. But there are real concerns that panel testing, testing for a whole bunch of foods at once, could become more common. And that might lead to unnecessary dietary restrictions, maybe even families taking kids off foods they were already eating and tolerating, potentially leading to loss of tolerance.
Oh, wow. That's the opposite of what you want.
Exactly. Which is why some experts advocate for a much simpler public health message, basically. Do not delay introduction of peanut. Introduce it into the diet within the first year of life when both the family and the infant are developmentally ready. Keep it simple.
So bringing all this groundbreaking research together, what's the biggest challenge now? Is it really just translating it into practical, widely applicable advice for all families without accidentally creating new hurdles or anxieties? It really highlights that tension between, the ideal clinical pathway and the messy reality of real-world implementation.
Precisely. It's a constant balancing act.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. For many families already living with peanut allergy, a huge question is, can it be outgrown? Is it always lifelong? And the good news is, while it's often persistent, a significant minority of children do actually outgrow their peanut allergy. There was a population-based study, the Health Nuts cohort in Australia, which found that about 22%, roughly 1 in 5 of children who had a challenge-confirmed peanut allergy at age 1 had developed tolerance by the time they were 4 years old. And Allergy UK also suggests about 1 in 5 children outgrow it, usually by around age 10. So there is hope for some.
Yes, definitely. And we're getting better at predicting who is likely to have persistent allergy versus who might resolve it. Research consistently shows that children with persistent peanut allergy tend to have significantly larger skin prick test reactions and higher CD levels, both at age 1 and later at age 4, compared to the kids who eventually resolve their allergy. Basically, increasing wheal size on the skin test and higher CG levels in the blood are strongly associated with persistence. This led to developing some specific thresholds.
Thresholds. Okay, what are those and what do they tell us? Can they give families some certainty?
They can give a pretty high degree of certainty, yes. These thresholds have what's called a 95% positive predictive value, meaning if a child's test results are above these levels, there's a 95% chance their peanut allergy will persist. So at age 1 year, if the skin prick test wheal is 13 millimeters or larger, or the CE blood level is 5.0 QOL or higher, persistence is very likely. Then, if you test again at age 4 years, the thresholds are an 8 millimeter or greater skin prick test, or 8 millimeters or 2.1 kilo or higher.
13 millimeters SBAT or 5 cg at age 1.
Right.
8 millimeters or 2.1 cg at age 4.
Right. Knowing these thresholds can really help clinicians and families. It can significantly reduce the need for unnecessary and often anxiety-provoking oral food challenges later on to check for resolution if the numbers are already very high. It offers some much-needed clarity.
That sounds incredibly useful for families looking for answers. But hang on. Earlier we talked about how good that ERA-H2 specific IgE test is for the initial diagnosis. Does it also help predict if an allergy is likely to resolve later on?
Good question. And interestingly, no, it doesn't seem to. In the HealthNet study looking at resolution, ERA-H2 specific IgE levels measured at age 1 were not able to predict persistent peanut allergy. Its predictive ability was basically no better than chance.
Really?
Yeah.
Even though it's so good for diagnosis?
Yes. It really highlights a clear distinction, doesn't it, between diagnosing a current allergy and predicting its future course, whether it will resolve or persist. ERA-H2 seems excellent for the first task, but not so much for the second, based on this data. It's not a one-size-fits-all marker, which is important for clinicians and families to understand.
Okay, that's a really important nuance. And just to clarify, other factors like having other nut allergies or dust mite sensitization or other food allergies, eczema, asthma, none of those were independent predictors of persistence once you accounted for the SPT and the standard CE levels.
Correct. In that particular study, after adjusting for the SPT responses and the whole peanut PSI-E levels, those other factors didn't add independent predictive value for persistence. It really boiled down to the size of the skin test reaction and the level of peanut-specific IgE.
Right. That simplifies things a bit then, focusing on those core allergy markers for prognosis. Okay, so beyond prevention and natural history, there's also the whole landscape of treatment. Oral immunotherapy, or OIT, you hear about it a lot now, is becoming increasingly popular. The basic idea, as I understand it, is to incrementally expose a person to very, very small amounts of peanut protein over time, aiming to increase their reaction threshold, the amount they can tolerate before reacting, and maybe decrease the severity of reactions if they happen. It's generally not seen as a full cure, though, right?
That's generally correct, yes. It's more about desensitization, increasing tolerance. And while OIT definitely holds promise, one really significant challenge, especially when looking at clinical trials, has been the sheer variability in how treatment success is actually defined. It varies quite a bit from study to study. Things like what specific dose of peanut allergen is considered tolerated at the end, and what kinds of symptoms are deemed dose-limiting, meaning bad enough to stop increasing the dose or fail the final challenge.
Okay. So it's not always clear what success actually means on paper from one study to the next. I can see how that could cause confusion for patients and doctors trying to interpret the results.
Precisely. And it has real implications. For example, some definitions of success, maybe using very strict objective criteria like the Practal Consensus Report, might classify things like isolated abdominal pain or maybe mild skin symptoms as tolerated, meaning the patient still passes the challenge. But using those kinds of definitions might actually overestimate how effective the treatment is in a real-world, practical sense. One meta-analysis actually found that using less objective stopping criteria during challenges could inflate the perceived efficacy of OIT by as much as 15%.
15% just based on how you define success.
Wow. And conversely, if you define success as having no symptoms at all during the final food challenge, that might underestimate the real-world benefit. Because many patients, even after technically successful OIT, might still experience very mild transient symptoms, like maybe an itchy mouth, especially at lower doses. And sometimes those mild symptoms can actually serve as a useful early warning sign for them.
That really speaks to the sort of human element of living with an allergy, doesn't it? It's not just about whether the treatment worked according to some strict clinical trial definition, but whether it makes a meaningful difference in the daily lives and anxieties of patients and families. What truly feels like success can be very personal, I imagine.
Exactly. And this is actually echoed in patient feedback. There was a survey of over 800 OIT patients and parents, and it found that 90% considered it acceptable to experience mild symptoms only after completing OIT.
90%. Okay.
So that suggests that maybe defining a tolerated dose based on the absence of bothersome symptoms, or symptoms that aren't just mild and transient, that might actually be more meaningful to patients than definitions based strictly on no symptoms at all, or only counting severe dose-limiting symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And if it connects this back to the bigger picture, It really highlights the critical need for patient-centric outcomes in clinical research, doesn't it? Knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied in a way that matters to people. And for treatments like OIT, that really means aligning those trial definitions with the practical realities and, frankly, the hopes of those living with the allergy day to day.
Absolutely. Okay, so bringing all of this back to the practicalities of daily life. For someone managing a peanut allergy right now, what are the absolute key takeaways for living with it safely?
Well, since there's currently no cure available for everyone, strict avoidance remains absolutely key. Rule number 1. And that means being really vigilant about hidden peanuts. You need to be aware of other names on labels, things like Arachis hypogaea, which is the scientific name, or common terms like ground nuts, sometimes monkey nuts, or cacahuète in other languages. Also, it's generally best to avoid unrefined peanut oil, sometimes called groundnut oil, as it might still contain allergenic proteins, and even refined peanut oil. Most guidelines recommend avoiding it too, just because it's hard to be 100% certain that all the protein has been removed during processing. Better safe than sorry.
Right, and cross-contamination is always a big risk too, isn't it, both in manufacturing and at home?
It is, yes. It can happen during manufacturing or storage or even just food preparation. So, practicing good hygiene at home is essential. Simple things like cleaning surfaces thoroughly, using separate chopping boards and utensils if possible, washing hands carefully. It's also useful to remember the biology. Peanuts are actually legumes. They're in the same family as garden peas, lentils, soya beans, chickpeas. They are distinct from tree nuts.
Ah, okay. So not technically a nut.
Correct. They're legumes. However, that doesn't mean there's no overlap in allergies. Unfortunately, about 30 to 40% of people with peanut allergy will also have an allergy to at least one type of tree nut, like almonds, walnuts, cashews, etc. And having a peanut allergy also seems to increase the likelihood of being allergic to other legumes, like lupin, which is used increasingly in foods, and also to sesame. So awareness of those connections is important.
Okay. And what about managing reactions, if they unfortunately do occur?
Adrenaline autoinjectors, AAIs, are absolutely crucial for treating severe reactions anaphylaxis. It's standard practice and highly recommended to always carry 2 AAIs in case the first one doesn't work or symptoms return.
2, always got it.
Yes. Also, a really critical point. If you or your child has coexisting asthma, maintaining good asthma control is vital. Poorly controlled asthma significantly increases the risk of having a severe, potentially fatal anaphylactic reaction to peanut. And finally, having an allergy action plan is really important. This should be filled out by a healthcare professional and shared with schools, caregivers, anyone responsible for the person with the allergy. It clearly lists the allergies, the symptoms to watch for, and exactly what medication to give and when.
That makes sense. Clear instructions in an emergency. Wow. We've covered so much ground today. Really, from the microscopic precision of these new diagnostic tests like AIR-H2, all the way to the very human experience of living with and maybe even overcoming a peanut allergy. It's crystal clear that the science is moving incredibly fast in this area. And, just staying informed is absolutely key for families navigating this. We've explored the growing impact of peanut allergy, how these groundbreaking diagnostic tests can significantly slash those worrying false positives. We've looked at the Leap Palliative's crucial insights about identifying high-risk infants early, and those really interesting nuances about sensitization, including that unexpected paradox related to different populations.
And we also dug into the complexities surrounding the prevention guidelines. The challenges in translating that cutting-edge research into practical universal advice. And that critical debate around how we even define treatment success in oral immunotherapy trials, always trying to bring it back to the patient's perspective. And, of course, we reinforce the enduring need for vigilance, preparedness with AAIs, and just smart management strategies when living day-to-day with a peanut allergy.
So hopefully, armed with this knowledge from our deep dive today, you feel better equipped. Better equipped to understand the medical advice you might receive, to ask informed questions of your doctors, and ultimately to make the decisions that feel right for your family. This should give you a really strong foundation.
This whole deep dive into the data, it really prompts a bigger question for me, thinking forward. As all these new guidelines and treatments continue to emerge, how do we, as a society, ensure that things like accessibility, equitable access to these advances, and truly patient-centered definitions of success, how do we make sure those are kept right at the forefront? Especially for something as potentially life-altering as preventing and managing severe allergies like peanut allergy.
That's a really important question. A lot to think about there, isn't it? Keep asking questions. Keep exploring the information out there. Because when it comes to being truly well-informed, that's really where the deep dive begins for you.